It was a typical Tuesday morning in Harlem. The sun had just begun to rise above the skyline, casting a warm glow across the bustling streets. Folks hurried to work, grabbed coffee from corner stands, and chatted with neighbors they saw every day. Harlem, always brimming with energy, felt like a place where anything could happen. In the middle of it all was Marcus, 35 years old, dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit and freshly shined shoes. He was the kind of person who managed to both blend in and stand out. His easy confidence drew people in, yet it never came across as boastful. As he walked down Lenox Avenue, locals nodded in greeting. Marcus was a familiar face in this neighborhood. He'd grown up here, shaped by the streets and the culture that defined Harlem. But that morning was different. As Marcus approached his car, a sleek black sedan parked in front of a historic brownstone, he noticed something off. Two police officers strode toward him, their expressions cold and unyielding. He recognized them from occasional patrols around the area, but they had never paid him any mind before. Today, though, they were coming straight for him. "Excuse me, sir," one of them called out. Marcus turned, already feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. The officer's badge read Officer Kincaid, and behind him stood Officer Mitchell, hand hovering near his duty belt. Marcus kept his voice steady. "Yes," he asked. Kincaid narrowed his eyes. "Let me see some ID." Marcus had been through this before, stopped for no apparent reason, asked questions that didn't really have answers. He'd learned to remain calm. His father had taught him early on how to act around law enforcement, always be polite, never escalate. Marcus pulled out his wallet. "Can I ask why you need my ID?" Kincaid's tone sharpened. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for. Just show me your ID." Marcus handed over his driver's license. Kincaid examined it for what felt like an eternity, then handed it back without a word. But the next question came just as Marcus expected. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" The officer's voice carried an accusatory edge, as though Marcus didn't belong. "I live here," Marcus replied, keeping his cool. "I'm just heading to work." Kincaid shot a look at Mitchell, who stepped forward. Marcus sensed this was not going to be a quick conversation. "Where you coming from?" Kincaid pressed. "I had breakfast at the diner down the street," Marcus said, fighting the tension creeping into his voice. "Is there an issue, officer?" Mitchell spoke up, his hand inching closer to his belt. "Just answer the questions." Marcus inhaled slowly, remembering his father's words, "Stay calm. Don't give them a reason." "I'm an attorney," he said, hoping that might end the exchange. "I have a meeting in an hour, so if there's nothing else." Kincaid smirked. "An attorney, huh? Interesting." Marcus felt the air shift. A quiet dread settled over him. "Look, officer, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to get to work." Kincaid ignored the statement. "Mind if we check your car?" A familiar dread knotted Marcus's stomach. He had nothing to hide, but he knew how fast things could spiral. "I'd prefer you didn't," he said carefully. "I need to be on my way." Kincaid moved closer, hand brushing his baton. "Step away from the vehicle." Marcus hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. In a flash, Kincaid grabbed Marcus's arm, wrenching it behind his back. Pain shot up Marcus's shoulder as Mitchell lunged forward, forcing him down onto the sidewalk, a knee digging into his spine. "What are you doing?" Marcus protested, voice tight with pain. "You're under arrest for resisting," Kincaid said flatly, as though reciting a memorized line. Marcus's mind spun. He'd done nothing wrong. Yet here he was, face pressed against the pavement, cuffs biting into his wrists. A small crowd gathered, some onlookers horrified by what they saw. Across the street, a young woman was filming with her phone. Marcus caught her eye for an instant and felt a faint flicker of hope, maybe the footage would show the truth. But at that moment, as he was hauled to his feet and shoved into the back of a squad car, hope felt distant. The station was cold, clinical, and suffocating. Marcus was led through booking, his hands still cuffed behind him, suit rumpled from the scuffle. He kept his head high, refusing to let them see him break. "Name?" asked the desk officer, eyes fixed on the computer. "Marcus Brown," Kincaid answered before Marcus could speak. The officer typed the name into the system, frowning at whatever he saw on the screen. He glanced at Marcus, then at Kincaid, clearly puzzled. But he said nothing, only motioned toward a holding cell. Marcus was fingerprinted, photographed, and escorted to a dingy cell in the back. The door clanged shut, echoing with a finality that made Marcus's heart sink. He sank onto the bench, staring at peeling paint on the walls, mind reeling. How had he ended up here, someone who had worked tirelessly to build a good life, now sitting in a jail cell for absolutely no reason? Hours dragged on, broken only by footsteps of passing officers. Marcus tried to remain calm, but the question loomed, what happens now? Who would believe him? Outside, the mood in the station began to shift. Kincaid was making his rounds when a younger officer approached him. "You know who you arrested, right?" the young man asked. Kincaid shrugged. "Just some guy causing trouble." The officer shook his head. "No. He's not just some guy. He's a civil rights lawyer, one of the biggest in the city. I read his name in the paper last week. He's handled major cases." Kincaid froze. "You're kidding." "Not at all. If people find out you arrested him without cause, this could blow up in your face." Kincaid's smirk wavered. Doubt flickered across his features, though he tried to hide it. Meanwhile, word had spread outside. What started as a handful of onlookers grew into a crowd. People in the neighborhood recognized Marcus's name. Within hours, they gathered outside the station, demanding answers. They chanted for Marcus, held signs calling for justice, and recorded everything. Marcus's mother, an unflinching, proud woman who had raised him to stand tall, led the charge. She knew her son didn't belong behind bars and wasn't about to let this slide. Reporters began arriving, cameras rolling. This was no longer just a local incident, it was a full-blown scandal. Inside, the officers felt the heat. Lieutenant Romero, who had taken over the precinct a few months earlier, watched the growing crowd from her office window. She could sense the tension. "This is going to get ugly," she muttered, pacing. Something had to be done, fast. After what felt like an eternity, Marcus heard the cell door creak. Lieutenant Romero stood there, face unreadable. "Mr. Brown," she said, voice formal, "you're free to go." Marcus rose, his limbs stiff from sitting on the unforgiving bench. He followed her through the station, past officers who wouldn't meet his eyes. Shame and discomfort hung in the air. At the front entrance, he saw the crowd outside, which erupted in cheers the moment he appeared. Their voices washed over him like a wave. Romero hesitated. "I'm sorry for what happened. This shouldn't have gone down like that." Marcus met her gaze. "You're right, it shouldn't have." He stepped outside into his mother's waiting arms, surrounded by neighbors and friends. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Marcus ignored them. He knew the real fight was only beginning. In the days that followed, the story went national. Footage of the arrest spread online, fueling debates about racial profiling, police misconduct, and the justice system. Kincaid and Mitchell were placed on administrative leave while the department launched an internal investigation. But that wasn't enough for Marcus. He filed a lawsuit against the precinct, determined to ensure real accountability. The city split into factions. Some backed the officers, insisting they were just doing their jobs, while others saw Marcus's arrest as another glaring example of systemic racism. Marcus had spent his career fighting for justice, now it was personal. Months later, the trial began. The courtroom overflowed with spectators, tension crackling in the air. Marcus sat with his legal team, poised and focused. Kincaid and Mitchell tried to defend their actions, but their excuses crumbled under the video evidence, witness statements, and undeniable proof that Marcus had committed no crime. When the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted. Marcus had won. The department was held liable, and Kincaid and Mitchell lost their jobs. Still, Marcus felt the victory was bittersweet. He'd won one battle, but the broader war for justice was far from over. Standing on the courthouse steps, surrounded by microphones and supporters, Marcus spoke quietly but firmly. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about all of us. We deserve respect. We deserve to be treated like human beings. And we won't stop until that happens." In the months and years that followed, Marcus continued his civil rights work. His story inspired countless others to demand change. The police department faced new reforms, and fresh recruits were trained to serve with fairness and empathy. But Marcus knew genuine progress takes time. Winning a single case and reforming one department was only the beginning. He walked through Harlem, the same streets where he grew up, feeling both a deep connection and a renewed purpose. He'd faced a grave injustice, but he'd also found strength in the community that rallied behind him. As long as they stood together, he believed they could build a world where everyone received the dignity they deserved. Marcus smiled as he pressed on, his mind already turning to the battles yet to come. He was ready. The late summer air hung thick in New York, clinging to people's skin, but the city pulsed with life. Fresh off his legal triumph, Marcus felt more determined than ever. His phone buzzed constantly with messages of support, new case requests, and interview invites. The lawsuit victory hadn't just been about him, it had signaled a pivotal shift, a push for accountability in a system long resistant to reform. But Marcus wasn't about to rest on his laurels. He arranged meetings with key community leaders, strategizing town halls to discuss police oversight. His success might have been the spark, but he knew the fire needed to keep burning. One evening, he found himself at Lucille's, a beloved soul food spot in Harlem that felt like home. Across the table sat Ella Rodriguez, a seasoned community organizer who had been instrumental in rallying public support for Marcus's case. "We have to seize this moment," Ella said, voice charged with urgency. "People are paying attention. We can't let them forget." Marcus nodded, setting down his iced tea. "I agree. I'm trying to figure out the best path forward. Lawsuits only go so far. We need real, structural change." Ella leaned closer. "What about a civilian review board? We've pushed for it for years. Now we actually have leverage." Marcus considered the idea. He'd heard proposals for civilian oversight before, but after his case, the city might finally be open to it. "You're right," he admitted. "If we can empower citizens to oversee police conduct, that could be huge. But we'll need the city council on board. That's why we apply pressure now," Ella insisted. "With all the media coverage, they won't have a choice." Marcus nodded, picturing a future where officers were held accountable not just by fellow law enforcement but by the very people they served. It was ambitious, but it felt necessary. In the days that followed, Marcus threw himself into the work. He met with activists, attorneys, and sympathetic politicians. Predictably, he encountered pushback from city officials, police unions, and anyone threatened by the idea of reform. One afternoon, while strolling through Central Park to clear his head, Marcus got a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end belonged to Lieutenant Romero. "Marcus," she said, sounding cautious. "We need to talk." He hesitated. Romero had been the one who released him from the cell, and she'd always seemed different from the rest, but trust was still a big leap. Curiosity won out. "Where?" "Union Square in an hour," she replied. Neutral ground. Marcus arrived at Union Square, where skateboarders zipped by, families fed pigeons, and artists displayed their work. Romero sat on a bench in plain clothes, looking more human, less rigid than she had in uniform. She motioned for him to sit. "You didn't have to come," she said. "But I'm glad you did." Marcus settled beside her, wary. What's going on? Romero exhaled, scanning the plaza as if she expected eavesdroppers. Look, I know you've been fighting this fight for a while. What Kincaid and Mitchell did was wrong. No question. But it goes deeper than a couple of bad cops. Marcus's jaw tightened. How deep? She lowered her voice. There are people at higher levels trying to derail these reforms. They don't just resist change, they're actively sabotaging it. They don't want the public to see how rotten it is underneath. Anger flared in Marcus's chest. And you're telling me now because... Romero looked pained. Because I can't keep quiet anymore. After what happened to you, seeing how the community stood up, I couldn't just stand by. I have documents, names, enough to prove what's really happening. But you have to be careful. If they find out I'm involved. Marcus studied her, searching for any sign of deceit. All he saw was exhaustion, the weight of a broken system bearing down on her. Okay, he said at last. But if we do this, we do it right. She handed him a small folder, her hand trembling. This is just the start. Back at his office, Marcus opened the folder. Inside were memos, internal emails, and notes from high-level meetings. As he read, a disturbing picture emerged. A faction within the department was working to undercut reforms, manipulate crime data, and cover up misconduct. It was worse than he'd imagined. Marcus knew he couldn't tackle it alone. He immediately contacted his legal team and a trusted investigative journalist named Chloe Nguyen, who had covered his case extensively. Together, they started connecting the dots. This is huge, Chloe said, eyes wide as she scanned the documents. If we go public, it'll shake the city. Marcus nodded. We can't just dump it all at once. We need a plan. We have to build momentum so the public stays on our side. Over the following weeks, Chloe's articles appeared one by one, each revealing another layer of corruption. The city was outraged. Protests swelled, calls for reform echoed everywhere, and the demand for change became impossible to ignore. But the deeper they dug, the more Marcus realized they were treading on dangerous ground. The people in power wouldn't surrender quietly. One evening, leaving his office, Marcus spotted a black SUV parked across the street. He'd seen it before, always in the periphery. This time, it was pointed straight at him. As he reached his car, a tall figure in a dark suit stepped from the shadows. Mr. Brown, the man said, voice calm but menacing. We need to talk. Marcus gripped his phone, ready to call for help. Who are you? The man's smile was cold. Doesn't matter. What matters is you realize you're making some powerful people very uncomfortable. If you're trying to scare me, Marcus said evenly, it won't work. The stranger's smile vanished. This isn't a threat. It's advice. Walk away while you still can. Marcus's heart pounded, but he refused to show fear. I'm not walking away. That's too bad for you, the man replied, then slid back into the SUV, disappearing into the night. Marcus stood there, adrenaline coursing through him. He understood the risks, but it was no longer about him alone. He had to finish what he started. Threats piled up, anonymous calls, ominous letters, suspicious people lurking near his building. A brick was hurled through his office window with a single note, back off. Still, Marcus pressed on. The Civilian Review Board proposal was gathering steam, and with Romero's documents, they were close to winning city council support. Finally, a week later, journalist Chloe Nguyen obtained the last piece of the puzzle, the names of high-ranking officials orchestrating the cover-ups. It was set to run in the next morning's paper. That night, Marcus hardly slept. He knew that once the story broke, the backlash would be huge. But it was too late to turn back. By dawn, the city woke to front-page headlines, corruption at the top, inside the NYPD's dark side. The aftermath was immediate. Officers were suspended, investigations launched, and Marcus's name became a symbol of justice nationwide. More importantly, the city council approved the Civilian Review Board. At long last, a system that had failed so many was being forced to confront its own failings. Months went by, and the city began a slow, painstaking recovery. The review board got to work, and for the first time, police accountability felt real. Marcus had become a beacon of hope, though he never saw himself that way. To him, he was simply doing what needed to be done. Of course, the fight was far from over. Marcus received fresh threats, and not everyone was pleased about the changes. Some officers who lost their jobs blamed him for tearing down what they considered an essential institution. But fear wouldn't stop him. As the months turned into years, Marcus shifted his focus to other parts of the justice system in dire need of reform, public defense, housing inequities, and more. He teamed up with community organizers, planning a citywide push to tackle systemic disparities that had plagued New York for generations. Soon, other cities looked to his work as a model, inviting him to speak at conferences and consult with lawmakers. Fame brought scrutiny. Every choice he made was dissected by media outlets, and there were days he questioned if it was worth it. Then he'd recall the people who'd thanked him, the young woman who finally believed in change, the kid who said he wanted to become a lawyer because of Marcus's story. That was enough to keep him going. Years passed, and his influence grew. He helped transform not only his own city but also places across the country. Though he never sought the spotlight, his name became synonymous with resilience and the possibility of a fairer society. Still, he understood the system was vast and entrenched, and real change would be a marathon, not a sprint. One evening, as Marcus sat in his office reviewing case files, his phone buzzed. A simple text from his mother read, "I'm proud of you." He smiled, a quiet warmth filling him. The road had been long and treacherous, but he had remained true to himself and the cause he believed in. He fought for justice, for equality, for a world where dignity was a right, not a privilege. Looking out over the city lights, Marcus felt gratitude. Gratitude for his family, for his neighborhood, and for everyone who had stood by him when things seemed darkest. Together, they had faced down the shadows, and together, they had found the light. Over the following years, the progress they had fought for advanced gradually. The Civilian Review Board became a permanent part of the city's governance, and police accountability was no longer just a catchy phrase, it was a reality. Marcus's efforts continued to inspire new leaders, who picked up the torch and carried it forward. A decade after his landmark case, the city dedicated a statue in Harlem to commemorate Marcus's contributions. It wasn't just a tribute to him, but to everyone who had joined the struggle for change. Standing beside his mother, Officer Romero, Ella Rodriguez, Chloe Nguyen, and countless community members, Marcus gazed at the statue, an elegant figure of a man extending a hand to lift someone else up. As the late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Harlem's brownstones, Marcus turned to his mother with a soft smile. "We did it," he said. She smiled back, eyes brimming with pride. "Yes, we did." And with that, Marcus stepped into the future, fully aware that true justice was a journey, one he would keep walking for as long as it took.